They said afterward that everyone in Ashford Valley remembered the day Nora Calloway bought the ugliest horse in the county, though no two people remembered it quite the same way, and that alone should tell you something about the kind of story this is. What they agreed on was this: the gelding stood in the far pen at the Cutler auction, ribs showing through a dull, patchy coat, the color of old rust, one ear notched from some forgotten fight, a long, puckered scar running crooked down his near foreleg like a seam that had been sewn in haste and never smoothed. He did not paw or whinny or throw his head the way the good stock did. He simply stood, watching the crowd with an unblinking, unbothered patience, as if he had already decided what they thought of him and found it beneath his notice. Before I go further, if stories like this one, quiet ones about people who choose the thing nobody wants and are proven right for it, are the kind you come back for, you might stay a while and let me know you're here, because this one takes its time and it is worth the walking. Nora had $11 in a tobacco tin under her bed, saved from selling eggs and mending harness leather for neighbors who paid what they could. And she had come to Cutler's that morning not to buy anything at all, but to sell the last 2 hens she could spare before winter thinned her flock further. She had not planned on a horse. She had certainly not planned on that horse. But there is a kind of recognition that happens sometimes between a person who has been overlooked and a creature that has been discarded, and it does not ask permission before it takes hold. The ranch her father had built, 200 acres of hard grass, and a spring that never failed even in drought, sat 11 miles outside town, and it belonged, in the strict language of the bank's ledger, more to Silas Crane than to her, on account of the note her father had signed the winter before he died, a note Crane had bought up quietly from a failing bank and had been waiting with the patience of a man who collects debts the way other men collect grudges, to call due. The Valley's founders' race was 6 weeks off, the one held every autumn since before Nora was born, and this year the purse had grown large enough, on account of the new rail spur men wanted to run through the valley, that winning it outright would clear her father's note and buy her, for the first time since his death, a little room to breathe. She did not tell anyone this was why she stood at that pen rail longer than made sense for a girl with 2 hens under her arm and no money to spare. She only knew that the horse looked back at her the way she imagined she must look to strangers, plain and unwanted and quietly enduring, and that something in her chest answered to it before her head had finished arguing against the foolishness of the thing. Old Hollis Pruitt, who ran the feed store and had known her father since they were boys, came to stand beside her at the rail and looked the animal over with the slow, unhurried scorn of a man who had bought and sold enough horses to know a bad bargain from 30 paces. That there, he said, is not a horse. That is an argument somebody lost. She laughed despite herself because it was true, and because Hollis had a way of saying the thing everyone else was too polite to say plainly, and it was a comfort, in its way, to have someone speak so honestly to her when so much of her life since her father died had been conducted in careful, pitying half-sentences. She did not answer him. She watched the gelding a while longer, and when the auctioneer called the lot, and no one bid, and no one bid again, she raised her hand before she had decided to, and bought the ugliest horse in the county for $4, less than she would have spent on a good coil of rope. Laughter went round the yard, not cruel exactly, but the easy laughter of people glad to have something to talk about over supper, and she felt her face go hot but did not lower her eyes. She led him out past the rail on a rope she had to borrow, past men who tipped their hats to her with barely concealed grins, and rode him bareback the 11 miles home, because she had spent every cent she had and could not afford a saddle rental besides, and the whole way the horse walked steady and sure under her, picking his way over rough ground without complaint, and by the time the ranch house came into view against the last gray light, She had already begun, without quite admitting it to herself, to love him. She named him Cinder for the color of his coat in certain light, and for the way he seemed, standing in the barn that first night, like something that had already survived a fire and simply gone on existing afterward, because no one had told him he was allowed to stop. Her father's old bridle still hung on its peg by the barn door, the leather cracked now, but the brass buckle still bright where her hand had polished it 1,000 times without meaning to, a habit left over from childhood, and she found herself standing before it that night with the same unnamed hope she had felt as a girl, waiting for a rider who never quite came home. She did not know yet that the shape of that waiting was about to change. 3 days after the auction, a man appeared at her gate on foot, leading no horse of his own, his boots worn through at one heel, and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder that looked to hold everything he owned in the world. He asked, without preamble, if she had work needing doing in exchange for a place to sleep and a meal, and something in the plainness of the request, no flattery in it, no apology either, made her study him longer than she meant to before answering. He gave his name as Eli, nothing more offered, and when she told him she had nothing to pay him with but bad coffee and a leaking roof, he said that suited him fine, as he had slept under worse and drunk worse besides. She set him to mending fence that first afternoon, mostly to see what kind of man he was when no one stood over him, and he worked without complaint or conversation, methodical and quiet, and when evening came he had done more in one day than she could have managed in 3. It was at the barn, though, that she truly took his measure. Cinder had not let anyone but her near him since the auction, laying his ears flat and stamping if a stranger's hand came too close. But when Eli walked past the stall that first evening, the horse lifted his head and went still in a way Nora had not seen him go still for anyone, watching the man with an attention that was not fear. Eli did not stop. He did not reach out a hand or speak a word to the animal. He only paused a moment, longer than the walking required, and something passed over his face that Nora could not name. Quick and gone before she could study it properly, gone the way a cloud passes over a field and leaves the light changed without explaining why. She asked him plainly if he knew horses. He said he had known a few in his time. She asked if he knew this one. He was quiet a moment too long before he said, "No, ma'am, not this one." And something in the careful evenness of his voice told her the answer was not quite the truth, though she could not have said what part of it was false. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm she had not known in the 2 years since her father's death, and it surprised her how much comfort there was in the ordinary shape of shared labor. Eli mended the roof, and then the corral, and then the well pump that had groaned all winter, and in the evenings he sat across from her at the small table and ate whatever she had managed to put together without complaint, and slowly, without either of them naming it, he began working with Cinder in the mornings before she rose, so that she would come out to find the horse already saddled and standing calm at the rail, an animal that 6 weeks before would not tolerate a stranger's shadow falling across him. She asked once how he had done it. He said only that some animals needed to be asked rather than told, and that most men never learned the difference. It was the longest sentence he had offered her since his arrival, and she found herself turning it over for days afterward, the way one turns over a coin looking for the mint mark. Hollis Pruitt rode out that first month to see for himself what the town was already murmuring about: a stranger living rough at the Calloway place, and a horse nobody could explain the improvement in, and he watched Eli work the gelding through its paces in the round pen with the flat, assessing stare of a man pricing cattle. "He don't talk much, does he?" Hollis said afterward, leaning on the rail beside her. "No," Nora agreed. "Man who don't talk much is either got nothing to say or too much," Hollis said, and spat neatly into the dust. "And I know which one my money's on." She let the comment sit without answering it, because she suspected, without wanting to examine why, that Hollis was right, and that whatever Eli carried in that canvas bag of his was heavier than the bag itself let on. The first letter from Crane's office arrived with the frost, a formal notice reminding her of the note's terms and the date by which payment in full or forfeiture of the property must be settled, the language cold and precise in the way of men who have learned that politeness costs nothing and collects everything. She read it twice at the kitchen table by lamplight, and then folded it small and set it beneath the sugar tin where she kept the other notices, a little stack of paper growing through the autumn like a debt of its own. Eli found her sitting with her hands flat on the table some time later, not crying, simply still, and he did not ask what the letter said. He only refilled her coffee, set it before her without a word, and went back out to the barn, and she understood, watching him go, that this was his particular kindness, the not asking, the simply staying near. The Founder's Race and its purse sat 6 weeks off and then 5, and Cinder improved daily under Eli's quiet hand, his coat filling out with good feed, his stride lengthening into something that made even Hollis stop chewing his tobacco mid-sentence to watch. It was Hollis, in fact, who first brought the name into the open, riding out one evening with a look on his face Nora had never seen him wear, careful and troubled both. "Man matching your hired hand's description," he said slowly, was asked after in Miller's Crossing not 2 weeks back. Fellow who used to breed and train racing stock over that way, before some kind of accident, before he up and vanished from 3 counties at once. Nora said nothing, though her stomach had gone tight and cold. "Folks over there don't say his name kindly," Hollis added, watching her face. She asked evenly as she could manage what his name was. "Ashgrove," Hollis said, "or was. Man goes by Eli now, from what I hear, and don't answer to the other one at all." That night she went looking, not proud of it but unable to stop herself, through the canvas bag Eli kept beneath the cot in the tack room, and found beneath a change of clothes and a folding knife a single paper, creased soft from handling, a bill of sale 8 years old for a colt out of a mare called Ember Girl, the breeder listed plainly as Thomas Ashgrove, and the buyer's signature beneath it, belonging to a man whose name she did not know, but whose horse described in the careful hand of whoever had drawn up the paper chestnut gelding, white sock off 4, scar likely to form from birth injury to same leg, matched detail for detail, the animal sleeping now in her barn. She sat a long while with the paper in her lap before she folded it back exactly as she had found it and returned it beneath the clothes. And when Eli came in from checking the stock a few minutes later and found her standing in the doorway of the tack room, she did not pretend she had not been there. She only asked quietly why he had told her he did not know this horse. He was silent long enough that she thought he might simply walk away and leave the question standing between them unanswered, the way he left so many things unanswered, but at last he said, "Lo, that some truths a man carries so long he forgets how to hand them over without dropping them both." She asked him to try anyway, and so, standing in the cold tack room with the lamp guttering between them, he told her. He had bred Cinder himself out of the finest mare he had ever owned, and had meant the colt from the start for his younger brother, a boy of 17 with more nerve than sense, and a gift for riding that made grown men stop what they were doing to watch him work a green horse. Eli had trained the colt himself through 2 seasons, careful and slow, the way he trained everything, but his brother had grown impatient with slow, had entered a match race against Eli's counsel. The autumn the colt turned 3, had pushed the animal past what either of them was ready for, on ground gone soft with rain, and the fall that followed had broken the colt's leg in a way that should have ended him and had ended instead only the boy's life. the horse rising lame but living, the rider not rising at all. The county had blamed the horse first, the way frightened people blame the nearest thing, and then, once the horse had healed, enough to be sold off cheap to whoever would take him, they had turned and blamed Eli instead, for training an animal too spirited to be safe, for failing to stop a boy who could not be stopped, for surviving what his brother had not. He had sold every horse he owned within the season and left the county on foot rather than face another winter of it. And he had told himself, in the years since, that he would never again put his hand to a bridle in earnest, until he had seen 6 weeks past at Cutler's auction the same scarred foreleg he had bandaged himself as a young man, the same notched ear, standing forgotten in the far pen while a whole yard of strangers laughed, and he had not been able, in the end, to simply walk away a second time. Nora did not speak for a long while after he finished. It was not the accident itself that sat heaviest in her, though it was heavy enough, but the 6 weeks of silence that had come before this telling, the small daily deceptions of omission that had let her build trust on ground she had not known was uneven. She asked him only one thing in the end. She asked if the horse was safe. Eli said that no horse, and no man either, was ever entirely safe, but that this one had never once, in all the years he had known him, done wrong by anyone who did right by him first, and that the fault, if fault there truly was, had never belonged to the animal at all. She told him she needed time to sit with what he'd told her, and he said that was fair and that he would understand if she wanted him gone by morning. She did not answer that part. She only turned and walked back to the house, and behind her she heard him remain a long while in the tack room, not moving, the lamp burning low, a man who had told the truth at last and did not yet know what it would cost him. Word of who Eli truly was reached Silas Crane within the week, the way such things always found their way to men whose business it was to know things, and Crane rode out to the Callaway place himself on a bright, hard morning with the frost still silvering the grass, dressed too finely for country roads, and found Nora at the corral, watching Eli work cinder through his paces. Crane did not dismount. He sat his horse at a comfortable distance and remarked, in the pleasant tone of a man discussing the weather, that it seemed a pity for a decent young woman to entangle her good name and her father's ranch with a man run out of 3 counties for getting a boy killed. Nora said the boy's death had been an accident and not a crime, and that Eli had never once lied to her about what he had done, only about who he had been, which was a different thing entirely. Crane smiled the smile of a man who has already decided how a conversation will end, regardless of what is said within it, and offered then, plainly, to forgive the note entirely, the whole debt wiped clean, if she would sell him the ranch outright before the race, and let the matter of Eli Ashgrove's history become, as he put it, someone else's trouble to manage. He added, almost as an afterthought, that it would be a shame if the race committee learned who exactly was training her entry before the running, given the feeling that still lingered in certain quarters about the Ashgrove name. Nora understood, standing there in the cold, exactly what kind of bargain was being offered, and exactly what it would cost her to refuse it, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that the refusal came easier than she had expected. She told him the ranch was not for sale, and neither, she added, was the man working her horse, and that she intended to be at the starting line on race day with both intact. Crane's smile did not falter, but something behind his eyes went colder, and he told her, before turning his horse back toward town, that he hoped, for her sake, the animal could outrun the truth as well as he apparently ran everything else. Eli offered that same evening to leave before the race, to spare her the trouble his name would bring down on her doorstep, regardless of what she decided, and there was something in the flat, resigned way he said it that told her he had made his peace with disappearing again. the way he had made his peace with so much else. She told him plainly that she had not asked him to go and did not intend to let Crane decide for her who stood beside her and who did not. It occurred to her, watching his face in the lamplight, that this was the nearest either of them had come to saying aloud what had grown quietly between them across 6 weeks of shared labor and careful silences, and that it had come out sounding in the end less like a declaration than a simple fact of the household, which suited them both better than poetry would have. He stayed. In the days that remained before the race, they worked the horse together at dawn and dusk, and the town, hearing by now the whole of what Crane had spread about, watched the Calloway place with the particular hunger of people waiting to see whether scandal or courage would win out, and did not trouble to hide which outcome most of them expected. The morning of the founders' race broke clear and cold. The whole valley turned out along the fence line the way it turned out every autumn, though this year the crowd carried an extra current of anticipation that had nothing to do with the purse and everything to do with the woman leading a scarred, rust-colored gelding to the starting line, while a disgraced horseman stood at the rail with his hat in his hands, watching. There was laughter still, here and there, the same easy laughter from the auction yard. Men who could not resist remarking that the ugliest horse in the county had somehow ended up standing among Crane's own fine entries, and 2 others besides, sleek animals bred and fed for exactly this purpose. Hollis Pruitt stood near the rail chewing his tobacco, with the studied calm of a man who had already placed his bet and did not care who knew which way. Nora swung up onto Cinder's bare back. No saddle between them, the way she had ridden him home from Cutler's the first night, because it was the way he ran truest. And Eli came to stand at her stirrup a moment before the start, not offering advice, only resting his hand briefly against the horse's shoulder in a gesture that was less instruction than benediction. He did not know this course, she told him. He knows you, Eli answered, and that will have to be course enough. The race ran the old valley loop, 3 miles of open ground down along the creek bottom and back up through the stand of cottonwoods that marked the halfway turn, ground that favored horses who knew how to save themselves for the last hard climb, and Crane's rider, on a tall bay bred for exactly this kind of running, took the lead early and held it easily through the flat, the crowd's noise rising and falling like weather as the field strung out behind him. Nora held Cinder steady through the early ground, letting him find his own rhythm rather than forcing it, remembering what Eli had told her that morning, that the horse ran best when he was asked rather than driven, and by the time they reached the cottonwoods the gelding had settled into a long, easy stride that cost him nothing, while ahead of them the bay had begun, almost imperceptibly, to labor. The climb out of the creek bottom was the test every year, steep and loose underfoot. The ground where more than one fine horse had broken its heart, trying to hold a lead it could not sustain. And it was there, on that hard rising ground, that Cinder came into his own, the scarred foreleg driving beneath him with no sign of the old injury, the years of careful, patient training folding into a single unbroken effort that carried them past the bay a full length before the crest. And Nora heard, distantly, over the wind and the pounding of blood in her own ears, the crowd's noise change register entirely, from idle amusement to something closer to disbelief. They crossed the line 2 lengths clear of the field, the ugliest horse in the county, and the woman everyone had laughed at for buying him, and the silence that followed before the crowd found its voice again was the loudest thing Nora had ever heard. What followed in the weeks after was, in its way, less dramatic than the race itself, but no less important. The purse cleared her father's note in full, with enough remaining to see the roof properly mended before winter closed in for good, and Crane, whatever plans he had nursed for the valley's water rights, found himself with no leverage left to press them. His private threats against Eli's name having lost their sting the moment the whole county watched Ashgrove's careful, patient training carry a forgotten horse to victory in plain daylight. The race committee, faced with a result no one could argue with, quietly let the matter of Eli's history settle back into the past where it belonged, and Hollis Pruitt, collecting his winnings from 3 separate wagers he had not admitted to placing, allowed, with the closest thing to a smile Nora had ever seen cross his face, that a man who could turn that particular animal into a winner probably knew a thing or two worth listening to after all. Eli stayed on at the ranch through that winter and into the spring and the following autumn, and by then no one in Ashford Valley thought to call him a stranger any longer. Nora hung her father's old bridle back on its peg by the barn door that first winter, the brass buckle polished bright again, not out of habit this time, but out of something closer to gratitude. And some mornings, coming out to the barn before the frost had burned off the grass, she would find Eli already there ahead of her, standing at the rail with his hand resting on Cinder's neck, the two of them still and quiet together in the early light, and she would stop a moment in the doorway before going in, watching the shape of the life she had not known she was waiting for, standing plainly in front of her, patient, ordinary, and entirely real, in the same way the horse had once stood forgotten and unwanted, in a stranger's pen, waiting only for someone willing to look past what he appeared to be and see, instead, exactly what he was.